Imagine, the night has already settled around your home. Outside, only a few scattered lights remain. The streets have grown quiet, and every sound is softened by the darkness. Your breathing slows. Your body sinks deeper into rest. The day is slipping away, and before you opens a space of calm, a place where thought moves more slowly, more gently. And in this hush, if you listen closely, you might sense the distant murmur of the sea. Even if the nearest shore lies hundreds of miles away, the sea always seems near, etched into memory, alive in the deep corners of the mind. Its rhythm is steady, like breathing. The wave approaches, an inhale. The wave recedes, an exhale. This is a music older than words, a lullaby that has been rocking humankind since the beginning of time. Sleep and the sea are alike in many ways. Both invite us to drift away from the familiar, to surrender weight and form. At first, there are outlines, the shoreline, the fading images of the day. Then slowly, we descend into deeper layers, cooler, quieter, endless. In the sea, as in sleep, there is no rush, only the gentle pull of currents carrying us into stillness. For centuries, people have compared dreams to water. The Greeks spoke of rivers that brought visions from the underworld. In India, the mind was likened to a hidden stream, whose waters rose only in sleep. Folk tales often describe silent lakes where another world waits beneath the surface. Sailors once believed that the sea itself remembers human voices and thoughts, keeping them safe until one day they rise again, like driftwood after a storm. This is why nighttime stories pair so naturally with the sea. Darkness makes it easier to imagine yourself on a quiet deck or on a moonlit shore, staring out at a horizon that never ends. Eyes close, breathing slows, and the mind is ready to listen. Tonight, our journey follows not the living cities on modern maps, but the silent ones beneath the waves. Cities are human footprints, symbols of labor and community. But sometimes they vanish, not destroyed, not erased, simply taken gently by the sea. Their streets remain, their columns still point upward, though instead of sky, rippling light dances above them. The sea, you see, is not only a force of ruin, it is also a keeper. Where walls fall, water lays its veil across the stones. Where fragments scatter, the currents arrange them into new patterns. For centuries, even millennia, the sea preserves what was once thought lost. And when divers or archaeologists stumble upon these treasures, history breathes again. There is comfort in this. What seems gone forever may only be asleep beneath the tide. Just as we ourselves surrender each night to sleep and return renewed, so too do cities vanish into water, only to return one day as stories. Our voyage tonight will be slow, without hurry. We are not chasing wonders with urgency. We are letting the tide guide us from one place to the next, and our companions will be 3 cities: Heracleion, the sacred Egyptian port swallowed by the sea. Port Royal, the bustling Caribbean harbor, dragged beneath the waves in a single moment. And Pavlopetri, the oldest submerged city ever found, a window 5,000 years into the past. One by one, we will drift through them, not as tourists in a rush, but as dreamers, like beams of light gliding across ruins underwater. But before we begin, pause for a moment. Picture yourself standing on a shoreline. The night is warm. Stars shimmer on the surface of the water. Somewhere far away, a bird calls once and fades. You step forward, and your feet touch the cool edge of a wave. It does not frighten you. It invites you. It draws you softly, not like a fall, but like a gentle surrender. The water welcomes you, just as it welcomed those cities long ago. And so, our journey begins. When we look at a map of the world, we imagine permanence. We believe mountains will always be mountains. Rivers will always run their course, and cities, once built, will remain forever where they stand. But the earth is not still. It shifts, it breathes, it bends, and the sea, vast and patient, waits for its moments to reshape the edges of human life. Throughout history, cities have vanished beneath the waves. Some slipped away slowly, like lanterns sinking into twilight, consumed inch by rising tides. Others were taken in a single breath, destroyed in moments by sudden violence, an earthquake, a storm, the collapse of the land itself. There are many reasons a city may be lost to the sea. Let us drift through them gently, one by one. Beneath our feet, the ground seems solid, but far below, the crust of the planet floats upon molten layers that are always in motion. Plates push against one another, pull apart, or slip sideways. Sometimes this movement is quiet and gradual. Sometimes it is sharp, a violent release we call an earthquake. Imagine a thriving port, its harbors crowded with ships, its markets alive with voices. And then, in a single instant, the ground shifts. The foundations tilt, the land splits. Buildings slide, and water rushes in. To those who lived through it, it must have felt as though the earth itself had betrayed them. Entire neighborhoods could vanish in minutes, swallowed by the sea. Rivers bring not only life, but also change. Silt builds up, soils shift, and over time, the ground may soften. If a city rests on such delicate land, on deltas, on marshes, on coasts where rivers meet the ocean, the weight of its own stone and timber can press downward, sinking it little by little. What once was dry becomes damp. What once was firm becomes fragile. Some ancient settlements disappeared in this way, not from sudden disaster, but through slow surrender. Imagine living there, year by year, the water creeping closer, the soil giving way. Generations might adapt, raise their homes, build higher walls, but eventually the tide wins, and the sea lays its claim. The sea is gentle, but it is also wild. In moments of storm, it roars with unimaginable strength. Walls of water rise, crash, and sweep across the land. Entire harbors can vanish beneath a surge. History tells of great storms that struck with little warning, destroying ships, markets, and temples. For those who survived, all that remained was silence, and the memory of waves too tall to comprehend. And then there is the sea itself, always rising and falling with the ages. Ice ages lock water away, lowering the oceans. Warmer eras release it, and the sea expands. 5,000 years ago, shorelines lay far beyond where they stand today. Entire villages, once safe inland, are now hidden beneath shallow waves. For us, it is a reminder that what feels eternal is often only temporary. The ground beneath us may last a lifetime, but over centuries, it drifts, it sinks, it transforms. And so, in every culture, there are legends of drowned lands. The Greeks spoke of Atlantis, a city proud and powerful, swallowed whole by the sea. The Welsh told of Cantrair Gwaelod, a fertile kingdom protected by dikes, until one night the gates were left open and the ocean rushed in. In India, myths spoke of Dwarka, the city of Krishna, shining with palaces and towers, now said to rest beneath the waves. Behind each legend may lie a memory, a story passed down through centuries of a village, a city, or a kingdom that truly did vanish when water claimed the land. Myths soften the loss, but they also remind us the sea keeps what it takes. Yet as much as the sea consumes, it also preserves. In the dry air of deserts, ruins crumble. In forests, they are devoured by roots. But under the water, time slows. Walls remain standing, mosaics survive. Even delicate carvings endure in silence. This is the paradox. What the sea takes, it often protects. A harbor filled with statues may vanish from sight, but under layers of silt and sand, the statues wait. A street lined with homes may disappear, but the outlines of those homes rest intact, safe in darkness. When divers swim through these ruins today, they see not destruction, but preservation. They move through temples, streets, and marketplaces, almost as if the people had only just stepped away. When we speak of cities beneath the sea, we are not only telling stories of loss. We are speaking of memory, of time held in suspension. Each submerged city is like a dream frozen in place, untouched by the hands of centuries. And perhaps that is why these stories comfort us as we drift into sleep. They remind us that nothing is ever truly gone. The past does not vanish. It waits quietly beneath the surface. And one day, when the moment is right, it rises again, like a forgotten dream returning in the middle of the night. This is why our journey matters. We are not simply listening to history. We are listening to the patient voice of the sea, telling us of places it has kept safe for us. And tonight, we will visit them together. Every voyage needs a map. Tonight, ours is not made of paper or glowing screens. It is softer, woven from stories and gentle currents. It will carry us from one shore to another, not with urgency, but with patience. 3 destinations await. 3 cities that once flourished in sunlight, now resting quietly beneath the waves. Our first stop lies in the waters off the coast of Egypt, where the great Nile meets the sea. Long ago, merchants and pilgrims passed through its harbors. Statues of gods watched as ships carried grain, gold, and incense. Heracleion, they called it, a city sacred to both trade and faith. For centuries it thrived until the earth shifted and the waters rose. The sea spread across its temples, its markets, its docks, and gently closed them in silence. For 1,000 years, Heracleion slept unseen, until divers brought its name back into light. From Egypt, we drift westward, across the Atlantic, to the blue waters of the Caribbean. There we will find Port Royal, once called the wickedest city on earth. In the 17th century, it was a haven for merchants, privateers, and pirates, overflowing with taverns and gold. But one morning in 1692, the ground shook. In minutes, the bustling streets slid into the sea, swallowed by sand and surf. Today, divers move through a ghostly world of cobblestones, bottles, and timbers, a city stopped in its tracks, preserved by disaster. Our final stop lies in Greece, near the southern shores of Laconia. Beneath shallow waters rests Pavlopetri, the oldest submerged city ever discovered. Its streets and courtyards are still visible, laid out much as they were 5,000 years ago. Here, before the pyramids of Giza, families gathered, traded goods, and built lives on land that would one day slip beneath the sea. Pavlopetri is a reminder that time reaches deeper than we often imagine, that civilizations rise and fall, and that the sea has been a witness far longer than we have. So tonight, we will travel from the ancient to the modern, from myth to memory. We will wander through Heracleon's sacred harbors, stand in the silence of Port Royal's drowned taverns, and stroll the stone outlines of Pavlopetri's forgotten homes. Each city has its own rhythm, its own story, its own way of resting beneath the water. Think of it as a gentle arc, the sacred, the sinful, the timeless. Together, they form a lullaby sung by the sea, a song of what is lost and what is preserved. As you listen, you may find your eyelids growing heavy. That is as it should be. These are not tales meant to stir the heart with urgency, but to soften it with calm. If you drift into sleep, let the sea carry you. If you remain awake, let the images unfold like lanterns on dark water. The journey begins now. Our first destination, the Egyptian city of Heracleion, gateway to the Nile, now resting beneath the waves. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the coast of Egypt, more than 2,000 years ago. The great Nile, swollen with the rains of Africa, pours its waters into the Mediterranean. Its delta spreads like an open hand, fingers of green fields reaching into the blue. At the very edge, where river meets sea, stands a city, Heracleion. To travelers from Greece, Phoenicia, and beyond, this was the first breath of Egypt, the place where they set foot, before venturing inland to the temples of Memphis or Thebes. Heracleion was more than a port. It was a threshold. Ships laden with wine, oil, and cedar wood from the Levant docked here, exchanging goods for grain, papyrus, and gold carried down the Nile. Merchants spoke in many tongues, their voices mingling with the cries of fishermen and the chanting of priests. It was a place of trade, of faith, and of power, where the river's lifeblood met the vast expanse of the sea. Legends say the city was named after Heracles, the Greek hero who, according to myth, once set foot upon this very shore. To the Egyptians it was known as Thonis, a city blessed by the gods and essential to the kingdom's survival. Its founding is lost to exact history, but archaeologists believe it rose during the last centuries of the Pharaonic era, perhaps as early as the 6th or 7th century BCE. The city grew where river channels carved a safe anchorage, making it a natural harbor for the ancient world. Its location was both strategic and symbolic, the meeting place of fresh water and salt, of Egypt and the wider Mediterranean. What made Heracleion unique was its dual identity. To the Egyptians, it was sacred ground. Temples rose along its waterfront, the greatest dedicated to Amun, the hidden god of creation. Pilgrims came to leave offerings, believing that divine favor flowed through the waters of this harbor. Statues of Osiris, Isis, and other deities watched over the docks, reminding every sailor that Egypt's gods guarded the threshold. To foreigners, however, Heracleion was a marketplace. Caravans of grain, barley, and flax passed through its gates. Exotic goods from Africa, ivory, incense, gold dust, found their way onto Greek triremes and Phoenician ships. Taxes were collected here, making Heracleion not only a port, but a treasury. Whoever controlled it controlled the flow of Egypt's wealth. Picture the city at dawn, the harbor filled with sails, the air heavy with the scent of fish and smoke from cooking fires. Dock workers haul amphorae onto wooden platforms. Children chase each other through narrow streets, their laughter mixing with the braying of donkeys. Priests light incense at temple altars, their chants rising above the noise of trade. Women sell bread and vegetables in shaded stalls, while officials walk among the crowds, recording goods, weighing cargo, and collecting dues. Life in Heracleion was not easy. Floods from the Nile, storms from the sea, and the weight of constant labor pressed upon its people. Yet it was also vibrant, full of exchange and connection. Here, a Greek merchant might share wine with an Egyptian farmer, or a Nubian sailor might trade stories with a Phoenician navigator. Cultures overlapped, languages blended, and the city hummed with diversity. Heracleion was not only practical, but deeply spiritual. The annual Mysteries of Osiris were celebrated here with grandeur. Priests carried sacred barks, small boats adorned with gold and carvings, through the canals, reenacting the myth of the god's death and resurrection. Citizens lined the waters, holding lamps, watching the procession glide across the surface like stars reflected in the Nile. Such festivals tied the city not only to commerce, but to eternity, linking its people with gods and ancestors. Because Heracleion stood at the very gateway to Egypt, it also held military significance. Whoever controlled this city could watch over the traffic entering the Nile. During times of conflict, it became a fortified checkpoint, guarding the flow of ships that carried food and wealth to the heart of the kingdom. In later centuries, as the Greeks grew in influence and Alexander the Great's successors took control, Heracleion remained vital. Even under foreign rulers, it continued to serve as Egypt's maritime key, the outer lock, before the great river opened to the world. Yet even as it flourished, the seeds of its fate were already being sown. The city's foundations rested on soft, waterlogged soils of the delta. The Nile, generous in its floods, also shifted its channels, carving and eroding. Storms from the sea battered its edges. The weight of stone temples pressed down upon the fragile ground. Slowly, invisibly, the earth beneath Heracleion began to weaken. But those who walked its streets in those days knew nothing of this. To them, the city seemed eternal, its temples unshakable, its harbor endless, its gods immortal. They could not imagine that one day it would all vanish, sliding beneath the waves. Heracleion was not only a harbor of ships, it was also a harbor of faith. To step into the city was to cross not just a boundary of land and water, but of the human and the divine. In its heart rose temples, sanctuaries, and sacred canals where gods were believed to walk alongside men. The most important shrine was dedicated to Amun, the Hidden One, the Creator, the God whose name whispered of mysteries. Pilgrims came from far across Egypt and beyond to offer gifts: gold rings, amulets, carved figurines. Priests carried tall staffs and wore linen robes, their movements slow and deliberate, as though echoing the rhythm of the tides. Inside the temple, incense drifted upward, softening the air with the scent of resin and myrrh. Torches flickered against carved walls, casting shadows of gods with falcon heads and serpent crowns. Each statue was a guardian, a reminder that in Heracleion, trade and faith were inseparable. Every ship that docked was not only taxed, but also blessed. Each year, the city bloomed with ritual. The mysteries of Osiris, Egypt's god of death and rebirth, were celebrated with processions that shimmered across the waters. Priests carried golden barks, miniature sacred boats, on their shoulders, then set them gently upon the canals. The vessels floated slowly, guided by oars, lanterns glowing on their decks. Citizens lined the water's edge, holding oil lamps, their reflections dancing like stars on the surface. This was no mere festival. It was the retelling of a cosmic story. The death of Osiris, the sorrow of Isis, the triumph of rebirth. For those watching, it was reassurance that life and death were part of one endless cycle. The river itself became a stage, the city a temple, the people participants in a ritual as old as Egypt itself. When divers rediscovered Heracleion in modern times, they found colossal statues of gods lying on the seabed. Granite colossi of Hapi, the god of the Nile, their faces calm and eternal even after centuries beneath the sea. Carved lions, delicate amulets, fragments of altars, all preserved by silt and water. These finds confirmed what ancient texts had hinted, that Heracleion was a sacred city, a place where divine presence was woven into daily life. Imagine walking along its quays centuries ago. To one side, merchants weighed grain. To the other, priests chanted hymns. Between them, a colossal statue of Isis rose above the harbor, her gaze both welcoming and solemn. In this city, trade was not profane. It was sanctified. Every transaction, every cargo, every ship was under the eyes of the gods. For Egyptians, the meeting of the Nile and the Mediterranean was more than geography. It was a symbol. Fresh water and salt water mingled here, just as human life mingled with divine order. Heracleion embodied this union. The canals were not only practical routes for ships, they were sacred arteries, carrying life from the gods to the people. Fishermen whispered prayers before casting nets. Sailors poured offerings of oil into the water before departure. Even foreign merchants, arriving with little knowledge of Egyptian faith, participated, because to refuse was unthinkable. The harbor was a temple, and to disrespect it was to risk both business and the wrath of unseen powers. And so the sacred infused the ordinary. A child might play in the shadow of a shrine. A woman buying grain might pause to tie a votive ribbon to a statue. A dockworker, tired after hours of lifting amphorae, might touch the stone wall of a temple for strength. These gestures bound the people together, reminding them that their lives were watched over, blessed, and guided. At dusk, the city glowed. Oil lamps were lit along the harbor, their flames trembling in the breeze. Chants drifted from temple courtyards, low and resonant, like the heartbeat of the city. Bells and sistrums rang softly, their tones carrying over the water. For those who lived there, this was ordinary. But for us, imagining from afar, it feels almost otherworldly, a place where every sound and every gesture carried a sense of devotion. Heracleion was not merely a port. It was a threshold between the human and the divine, a sacred station where Egypt opened itself to the sea while keeping the blessing of its gods close. To walk through Heracleion in its prime was to believe in permanence. The temples seemed immovable, carved of granite and limestone, their columns rooted deep into the earth. The harbor stretched wide, filled with ships and voices, its waters alive with sails and oars. To the people of that time, the city must have felt eternal. But the earth beneath their feet was less certain. Heracleion stood on the edge of the Nile Delta, a land of soft soils and shifting waters. Beneath its streets, sand and clay pressed against each other, weakened by channels of water flowing silently below. The temples, colossal in weight, pressed downward with steady force. Each year, the floods of the Nile softened the ground further, and each year the sea pushed its tides against the shore. What seemed solid was, in truth, fragile. The city was balancing on a surface that could not hold it forever. The Mediterranean world was no stranger to earthquakes. Tremors rippled across its lands, sometimes gently, sometimes with sudden violence. A shift in the crust beneath the Nile Delta could have been enough to tilt entire districts, to split foundations, to let water surge where once there was stone. Imagine the ground trembling beneath the temple of Amun, the granite colossi swaying as dust fell from the ceilings. Walls cracked, canals widened, and water poured in. To those who witnessed it, it must have felt as though the gods themselves had shaken the city loose. Alongside the Earth's movements came the slow but relentless rise of the sea. Over centuries the shoreline crept inward, swallowing fields, then docks, then entire quarters. Storm surges pushed salt water into the city, eroding walls and weakening wood. What had once been dry streets became marshy ground, then shallow pools, then, at last, open water. Heracleion was not taken in one sudden blow. It was unmade gradually, piece by piece, until at last it yielded. And yet, there are signs that one particular moment sealed the city's fate. Archaeologists studying the ruins suggest that around the 2nd century BCE, a combination of disasters, earthquake, flood, and soil collapse, sent much of the city tumbling into the sea. Imagine the terror of that day, the roar of water rushing through streets, houses sinking as though the ground had turned to liquid, ships torn from their moorings and dragged under. Streets filled with people one moment, vanished the next. Temples that had stood for centuries disappeared beneath waves. The sacred city of Heracleion, gateway to Egypt, was no more. After the disaster, the sea claimed its prize. Sand drifted over broken walls. Silt filled the hollows where statues had fallen. Fish swam through colonnades where priests had once chanted. Slowly, memory of the city faded. Maps no longer marked its name. Historians wrote of a place called Thonis, or Heracleion, but their words grew vague, uncertain. For over 1,000 years, it seemed to vanish not only from the earth, but from the human mind. Heracleion's fall is more than a story of nature's power. It is a reminder of the fragility of human effort. No matter how great, no matter how sacred, no city can stand forever against the quiet patience of earth and sea. Yet the fall was not absolute destruction. It was transformation. The city did not vanish. It simply changed its dwelling, moving from land into water, from daily life into dreamlike memory. And that is why, centuries later, when divers descended into the murky waters off Egypt's coast, they found not dust or rubble, but a city still waiting. Statues lay where they had fallen. Columns stood in rows beneath the silt. Heracleion had not died. It had gone to sleep. For more than 1,000 years, Heracleion was a name half remembered in texts, a shadow in ancient writings. Scholars wondered if it had truly existed, or if it was only a legend, like Atlantis. The land where it once stood was gone, the waters of the Mediterranean covering the delta. To most, the city was lost forever. And then, in the year 2000, the sea gave up its secret. For decades, French underwater archaeologist Franck Godot had been searching the coast of Egypt, following clues in manuscripts, studying maps, listening to whispers from the past. He believed that Heracleion, mentioned by Herodotus and other ancient writers, must still rest beneath the waves. With patience and quiet determination, his team used sonar and magnetometers to scan the seafloor, listening for echoes where stone might lie hidden under layers of silt. At first, there was only silence. The instruments traced endless mud and sand. But then, patterns appeared. Regular shapes, too precise to be natural. Straight lines where nature draws only curves. A discovery waited beneath. Divers descended into the green waters of Abukir Bay. Visibility was poor, only a few meters, but in the murk, their lights caught something solid. A block of granite, carved by human hands. Then another and another, slowly. The outline of a city revealed itself. What they found was astonishing. Colossal statues lying on their sides, as if resting in sleep. Columns toppled but intact. The outlines of streets, canals, and temples buried beneath centuries of silt. Heracleion, the lost gateway to Egypt, was real. Over the years, the excavations revealed hundreds of artifacts. Colossal figures of pharaohs and gods, some over 5 meters tall, carved from pink granite, their expressions calm, undisturbed by time. Bronze coins and delicate jewelry, glimmering faintly under torchlight. Stone anchors, still heavy with the memory of ships that once tied to them. Among the most remarkable finds was a massive stone stele, an inscribed tablet, bearing decrees from the pharaohs. Its presence confirmed the city's importance, proving that Heracleion was not only a port of trade, but a place of royal authority. Even more delicate discoveries emerged. Small amulets, gold rings, ceremonial vessels. Each piece, preserved by the sea, spoke of the lives of ordinary people, their beliefs, their hopes, their daily rituals. To dive in Heracleion today is not like visiting ruins on land. On land, ruins are touched by sun and wind, by footsteps and voices. Underwater, everything is different. The silence is complete. broken only by the hiss of air bubbles. Fish move where citizens once walked. Shafts of light filter through the surface, turning statues into silhouettes of gold and shadow. It feels less like exploring a ruin and more like entering a dream. A city where time stopped, where every object is wrapped in the stillness of water. Divers describe the experience as eerie, yet calming. An encounter with a past preserved in its final moment. The rediscovery of Heracleion did more than revive a forgotten name. It illuminated a whole chapter of Egyptian history. Historians had long debated the role of this port, how it functioned alongside Alexandria and other cities. The finds confirmed that Heracleion was once the primary gateway to Egypt, a hub of trade, wealth, and religion before Alexandria rose to prominence. The statues of gods and the evidence of ceremonies confirmed its sacred role. The anchors and harbor installations showed its scale as a maritime hub. The coins and jewelry proved its prosperity. Piece by piece, the city returned. No longer legend, but fact. There is a paradox in all this. On land, ruins decay quickly. Stone crumbles, wood rots, wind and rain scatter the past. But under the sea, the opposite can happen. Silt covers ruins like a blanket, protecting them from erosion. The cold, dark water slows the march of time. And so, when divers uncovered Heracleion, they found not ruins shattered beyond recognition, but a city preserved, waiting quietly in its underwater slumber. It is as if the sea, having claimed Heracleion, chose also to guard it. Today, fragments of Heracleion's treasures are displayed in museums, but most of the city remains beneath the waves. Excavations continue slowly, carefully, for the sea is protective of its secrets. And yet, even with what has been revealed, Heracleion has returned to us, not as a bustling port, but as a reminder. A reminder that human achievements, no matter how great, are never eternal. A reminder that the sea can be both destroyer and preserver. And above all, a reminder that what we believe lost may only be waiting, hidden, until the right moment brings it back. Close your eyes if you wish, and take a long, slow breath. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a small boat in the waters of Abukir Bay. The sun is low, the surface of the sea shimmering with gold. The air smells of salt, and somewhere in the distance, gulls cry softly. Now you lean forward, placing the mask over your face. A final inhale, and then you slip beneath the surface. At first, the water is bright and full of color. Sunlight filters down, scattering into shifting patterns. You can still see the boat above, a fragile shadow on the surface. But as you descend, the light fades, becoming softer, more muted. The world grows quiet. The only sound is your own breath, slow and steady, like the rhythm of the waves. Shapes begin to appear through the haze of green and blue. At first they seem like rocks. But then, as your eyes adjust, you see the straight lines, the deliberate edges, stones cut by human hands, a wall, a column, the entrance to another world. You drift above what was once the harbor of Heracleion. The outlines of docks stretch beneath you, still visible after centuries. Massive stone anchors rest on the sea floor, heavier than any man could lift, their holes still carved for ropes long decayed. Once ships tied here, their sails fluttering in the wind, now only fish weave between them, flashing silver in the dim light. The silence is profound. You feel not emptiness, but presence, an echo of countless voices that once filled this harbor. Ahead rises something larger, the shadow of a statue lying on its side. You approach, and the light catches its features. A colossal figure, carved from granite, its face serene, its eyes closed, as if in eternal meditation. It is the god Hapi, guardian of the Nile. Though toppled, though resting on the seabed, his expression has not changed. He still watches, still endures. Beyond him, blocks of stone mark the remains of the Temple of Amun. The columns lie broken, yet their arrangement is clear. You imagine the temple standing tall, incense burning, chants filling the air. Now fish swim where priests once walked. Sea grass sways gently where offerings once lay. The water does not erase. Moving deeper, you follow the faint outline of a street. Its stones are uneven now, scattered by centuries, but the path is unmistakable. Alongside it run the remains of canals, channels that once guided sacred boats during the mysteries of Osiris. You imagine the golden barks gliding here, lanterns reflecting on the water, while crowds watched in reverence. Now, the canals are filled with sand, and yet in your mind they are alive again, glowing with sacred light. Near the seabed, something glimmers. You kneel, brushing silt gently aside. A bronze coin appears, its surface worn, but its shape unmistakable. How many hands held it? How many transactions, how many lives passed through this single object? You leave it where it lies, letting it rest again in its watery home. For these treasures do not belong to us. They belong to time, to the sea, to the memory of the city. As you drift, a realization settles over you. Heracleion is not gone. It is here, all around you, preserved in silence. A city that once echoed with trade and prayer now whispers in another language. The language of water, of stillness, of patience. You feel a calm acceptance. Nothing is ever truly lost. It only changes form. At last, your body begins to rise. The ruins sink slowly below, fading into shadow. Light grows stronger, brighter, until you break the surface once more. The air rushes into your lungs, warm and salty. Behind you, the waves close again over the city, keeping it safe in its secret world. You climb back into the boat, and as you sit, dripping with seawater, You know you have carried something with you. Not a coin, not a statue, not a fragment of stone, but the memory of walking through a place where time has stopped. Heracleion remains there, resting in its underwater silence. And in your mind, it will remain as well, a city of gods and merchants, of harbors and temples, preserved not in dust, but in the gentle embrace of the sea. The Caribbean sun shines bright, reflecting off turquoise waters. It is the 17th century, and at the edge of Jamaica lies a city like no other, Port Royal. To sailors, it is a beacon, a haven after weeks on restless seas. To merchants, it is a marketplace overflowing with opportunity. To pirates, it is paradise. Imagine the harbor first, a crescent of calm water filled with vessels from across the Atlantic, Spanish galleons heavy with silver from the New World, English frigates bristling with sails, smaller sloops darting between them, carrying rum, sugar, tobacco, and slaves. The air is thick with the smell of tar and salt, mingled with spices and smoke. Dock workers shout, hauling barrels onto wooden piers. Chains clatter as anchors are raised or dropped. Parrots squawk from the shoulders of sailors, while monkeys chatter in cages brought from distant islands. The harbor is alive, crowded, chaotic, and yet it thrives on that very chaos. Step away from the water and into the streets. Port Royal is not beautiful in the way of European capitals. It is not made of marble and palaces. Its buildings are wooden, quickly built, some leaning at strange angles. But what it lacks in elegance, it makes up for in energy. The streets are crowded with taverns, gambling dens, and markets. Inside the taverns, music spills out. Fiddles, drums, voices singing shanties in many languages. The smell of rum and roasted meat drifts into the alleys. Men gamble with dice, cards, and coin, their laughter and curses filling the night. Women move through the crowds, offering companionship for a price. For some, Port Royal is heaven. For others, it is sin embodied. Contemporaries called it the wickedest city on earth, and yet it prospered. Port Royal was more than vice, it was power. The English crown claimed the city in the mid-1600s, using it as a base against Spanish dominance in the Caribbean. From here, privateers set sail with royal permission to plunder Spanish ships. Men like Henry Morgan grew rich and infamous, their fortunes spilling into the taverns and warehouses of Port Royal. Merchants, too, found wealth here. Sugar plantations thrived inland, feeding a trade in rum and molasses that tied the Caribbean to Africa and Europe in the triangular web of commerce. Gold and silver passed through the city, making it one of the richest ports in the New World. On its streets, you would hear many tongues: English, Spanish, French, Dutch, and the languages of Africa, carried by enslaved men and women who labored under brutal conditions. The city was a crossroads, a meeting of worlds. Some came freely, chasing fortune. Others were brought by force. Together, They built the life of Port Royal, vibrant, ruthless, and fleeting. Morning brought the bustle of markets, sailors unloading cargo, shopkeepers arranging goods. Midday burned hot, shadows pressed against walls, and taverns filled with those seeking relief in drink. At night, the city roared. Lanterns lit the streets, songs rose from the taverns, and the harbor glowed with firelight on the water. For its inhabitants, this was normal. Few thought of tomorrow. Port Royal was a city of immediacy, of indulgence, of seizing the moment before the sea or fate could take it away. And yet, beneath the noise and wealth, cracks were forming. The city had been built quickly, much of it on sand and reclaimed land. Foundations were weak, the ground soft beneath the weight of buildings and walls. But few noticed. Who would question permanence when gold poured into coffers and rum flowed endlessly? To live in Port Royal before the disaster was to believe in its eternal revelry. The taverns would always be full, the harbor always crowded, the streets always alive. But time, as always, had other plans. It was the morning of June 7th, 1692. The sun rose bright over the Caribbean, casting its light across the harbor of Port Royal. Ships rocked gently at anchor, their masts sharp against the sky. The streets bustled with life, merchants opening shops, sailors staggering from taverns, women fetching water, children darting between stalls. It was a day like so many others, loud and careless. And then, without warning, the earth moved. At first it was only a vibration, subtle, almost like the roll of a distant drum. A few paused, wondering if a cart had passed too heavily, but then the ground shook harder, walls trembled, roof beams groaned. The tremors deepened into a roar, a sound as though the earth itself had split open. Panic rippled through the streets. People staggered, clutching at door frames. Barrels rolled from shops, smashing on the cobbles. Dogs barked and horses reared, eyes wide with fear. The city had no warning, no chance to prepare. Port Royal was built on loose sand, reclaimed land pressed between sea and shore. When the earthquake struck, the shaking liquefied the ground itself. Streets buckled and rippled like waves. Entire buildings tilted and slid, as though pulled by invisible hands. In moments, whole blocks collapsed, their timbers snapping like kindling. People screamed as the earth swallowed them. Houses that had stood for decades sank straight down into the softening ground. One eyewitness wrote that men and women sank suddenly into the earth, out of sight, and were seen no more. The harbor convulsed. Ships tore from their moorings, crashing against each other as waves surged into the city. The sea poured through the broken streets, sweeping away stalls, animals, and people alike. Within minutes, water covered entire neighborhoods. The proud, bustling port became a drowning place. Eyewitness accounts describe unimaginable scenes, taverns collapsing with patrons still inside, cobblestones splitting apart, churches crumbling as worshippers prayed for mercy. Some tried to flee toward higher ground, but the city offered little refuge. Others clung to floating beams or debris, carried helplessly into the bay. In less than 2 minutes, 2/3 of Port Royal had vanished. Nearly 2,000 people were killed instantly, swallowed by earth or sea. Thousands more were injured, stranded, or swept away. The survivors described the disaster as apocalyptic. The air was filled with dust and cries, with the stench of salt water and spilled rum. Fires broke out where kitchens had collapsed. Looters prowled among the ruins even as the wounded begged for help. Disease soon followed, carried by the filth of stagnant water and unburied bodies. When the earth grew still again, the city was unrecognizable. Whole streets lay beneath the waves, their roofs just visible under the water's surface. The harbor, once crowded with proud ships, was littered with wreckage. Where laughter and music had filled the night before, there was now only silence, broken by the sobs of the living and the whisper of waves over a drowned city. One clergyman who survived called it God's judgment on the wickedest city on earth. Others saw it less as divine punishment than as the simple cruelty of nature. But all agreed. Port Royal, the jewel of the Caribbean, the haven of pirates and merchants, was gone. Today, when divers explore the site, they find eerie reminders of that morning. Streets still lined with bricks, clay pipes, bottles, coins, everyday objects frozen in place. A pocket watch stopped at the very moment the earthquake struck, its hands marking 11:43. Time itself halted in that instant, leaving the city trapped in its final breath. The fall of Port Royal reminds us of the fragility of human endeavor. A city that lived as though tomorrow would never come was undone in a matter of moments. Its wealth, its power, its laughter, all silenced by the shifting of the earth. And yet, like Heracleion before it, Port Royal did not vanish completely. It rests beneath the waves, preserved in silence, waiting for divers to rediscover its stories. A city that lived in noise now lives in quiet. A memory held by the sea. When the earthquake struck in 1692, much of Port Royal slid into the sea in an instant. Streets, houses, taverns, and shops sank together, carrying with them the people, their possessions, and the pulse of daily life. For centuries afterward, the city lay hidden beneath the waters of Jamaica's harbor. To sailors passing overhead, it was only a shallow bay. To locals, it became legend, spoken of as the wicked city buried by God's wrath. But the sea had not erased Port Royal. It had preserved it. In the 1950s, underwater archaeologists began to explore the site. They expected ruins shattered beyond recognition. Instead, they found something haunting. Streets still paved with bricks, doorways leading into collapsed houses, fragments of daily life lying where they had fallen centuries earlier. It was as if time had frozen in that single violent moment, and the city had simply continued to exist, silent, submerged, waiting. Divers describe the experience as walking through a ghost town. Cobblestones are still visible, forming neat lines that guide the eye into the distance. Foundations of wooden houses lie half buried in sand, their outlines clear even after 300 years. Windows gape empty, their glass long dissolved, but their frames remain. In one area, the remnants of a tavern still stand. Clay pipes and glass bottles are scattered across the floor, as if their owners had set them down only moments before. In another, a kitchen hearth lies tilted on its side, blackened by fire that was extinguished only by the rush of the sea. What makes Port Royal unique among underwater ruins is not only its scale, but its intimacy. Archaeologists did not just find temples and fortifications, they found the ordinary details of daily existence. Clay pipes carved with delicate designs, pewter mugs, dice and playing cards, abandoned mid-game, tools, weapons, and coins, their edges softened by the water. One of the most striking finds was a pocket watch, its hands frozen at 11:43, the very moment the earthquake struck. In that watch, time itself seems to have been captured, holding the final breath of the city. Alongside objects, human remains were found. Some still lay within collapsed buildings, evidence of lives cut short in the chaos. Others were discovered in open areas, as though fleeing when the ground gave way. These skeletons are not just bones. They are reminders of the thousands who lived, laughed, and died in Port Royal streets. For archaeologists, the discoveries are not only scientific, but deeply human. Each artifact is a fragment of a life interrupted. Each ruin whispers of a story unfinished. To dive in Port Royal is to enter another world. Visibility is often poor, the water cloudy with silt. But as your eyes adjust, shapes emerge. Walls, doorways, the outline of a street. Sunlight filters from above, flickering across the ruins. Fish drift lazily through open windows. Seaweed coils around broken beams. It feels less like exploring ruins and more like stepping into a memory. Everything is still there, yet it is no longer alive. The city exists in a suspended state, neither fully gone nor fully present, caught between past and present, land and sea. For archaeologists, Port Royal is one of the most important underwater sites in the world. Unlike many ruins, which erode on land or are rebuilt over centuries, Port Royal was sealed in an instant. It offers a snapshot of 17th-century life preserved with uncanny detail. The discoveries reveal not only the wealth and vice of the city, but also the daily habits of its people, the way they ate, drank, played, and worked. In studying these artifacts, we see Port Royal not as myth, but as reality. Today, parts of Port Royal still lie underwater, protected as a National Heritage Site. Some artifacts are displayed in museums, but most remain beneath the waves, guarded by the sea. The city continues to whisper its story, not through bustling taverns or ringing coins, but through silence and stillness. For divers who visit, the feeling is unforgettable. To swim through Port Royal is to drift through a city paused in mid-motion, its final day preserved forever. It is haunting, yes, but also strangely peaceful. Port Royal is remembered as a place of greed and excess, called wicked and sinful by its critics. But underwater, those judgments fade. What remains are human lives, people drinking, laughing, playing, working, unaware that their world was about to end. Their ghosts do not shout or condemn. They rest quietly, held by the sea. And in that quiet, Port Royal teaches us a lesson. That joy and vice, wealth and ruin, laughter and loss, all are fleeting. That even the loudest cities can fall silent in an instant, and that sometimes silence itself can become a form of memory. Take a slow breath and picture the waters of Jamaica's harbor. The sun is warm above, but you are ready to descend. With a gentle push, you slip beneath the surface, and the noise of the world fades away. At first, the water is bright. Sunlight scatters across the surface, dancing in golden patterns. You can still see the outline of your boat above, but as you drift deeper, the light dims, the colors soften, and the sea takes on a quiet green glow. Then, through the haze, shapes emerge. At first, they seem like rocks, but no, there are corners, edges, lines too precise to be natural. A wall, a window, the doorway of a house long abandoned. You are entering Port Royal, the city that sleeps beneath the waves. You hover above a street paved with bricks. They lie uneven now, some tilted, some sunken, but the pattern is clear. This was once a bustling lane, where merchants called to customers and sailors staggered from taverns. Now only silence remains. Fish flicker past, darting into cracks in the walls. The street stretches ahead like a path into memory, guiding you deeper. On your left, a building leans sideways, its beams broken but still recognizable. You drift inside. Scattered across the floor are clay pipes, pewter mugs, and shards of glass bottles. A tavern, once filled with music and laughter, frozen in its final moment. Imagine the night before the quake. The air thick with smoke and rum. Dice rolling on wooden tables. Songs echoing into the street. Now only water fills the space, and the ghosts of voices linger in the silence. Further along, you find the remains of a kitchen. A hearth lies tilted, bricks darkened by fire. Nearby, a pot rests on its side, its contents long dissolved into the sea. It is as though the cook stepped away for a moment and never returned. Objects lie scattered, spoons, knives, broken plates. Each one tells a story. Each one belonged to someone who never imagined their home would sink into the sea. You drift into another house, and there, half buried in sand, lies something small but extraordinary. A pocket watch. Its glass is clouded, its case tarnished, but its hands are visible, stopped forever at 11:43, the very moment the earthquake struck. Time itself was captured in this object, the city's final heartbeat, preserved beneath the waves. You gaze at it, feeling the weight of history in a single fragile artifact. Nearby, you notice bones resting quietly among the ruins, the remains of someone caught in that morning of chaos. They are not frightening, they are peaceful, as though asleep. The sea has covered them with sand and silt, laying them gently to rest. Here, the city is not haunted by terror, but by stillness. A reminder that every life, no matter how loud, eventually finds silence. As you continue, the ruins stretch around you, doorways leading nowhere, staircases ending in water, fragments of furniture drifting with the current. The light from above flickers, turning the city into a dreamscape of shifting gold and shadow. There is no fear here, only awe. You are walking through a memory, a place where time has paused. The city has not vanished. It endures, quietly, beneath the waves. At last, your body begins to rise. The ruins sink slowly below, fading into the green haze. The light grows brighter. You break the surface with a rush of warm air, blinking against the sun. Behind you, the water closes again over Port Royal, hiding its streets from view. But you carry the memory with you. The taverns, the watch, the streets paved with bricks. The feeling of time stopped, preserved forever by the sea. Port Royal remains there still, resting in silence. A city once filled with noise and laughter, now transformed into a dream beneath the water. Far from the noise of Caribbean taverns or the Colossi of Egypt lies another kind of city, smaller, quieter, more ancient than both Heracleion and Port Royal. It rests in shallow waters near the southern coast of Laconia in Greece, where the blue of the Aegean touches the shore. Its name is Pavlopetri, and it is the oldest known submerged city in the world. Pavlopetri dates back nearly 5 millennia, to around 2800 BCE, older than the pyramids of Giza, older than most written languages. When modern divers look down and see its streets, they are not just looking at ruins. They are looking directly into the dawn of urban life. This was not a grand metropolis. It was no Alexandria or Babylon. It was a modest town, perhaps home to a few hundred people at most. Yet in its modesty lies its wonder. The daily lives of ordinary families, preserved in stone, visible even now beneath the waves. Unlike many ruins scattered in fragments, Pavlopetri is startlingly complete. Streets run in straight lines, dividing the settlement into blocks. Foundations of houses are still visible, their rooms outlined with precision. Some buildings had multiple rooms, bedchambers, storage areas, even courtyards. There are tombs nearby, cut into the rock, reminders that life and death were lived side by side. Pottery fragments have been found in abundance, bowls, jars, and vessels used for storing food, water, and oil. This was not just a place of survival, but of community. Picture a morning in this town 5,000 years ago. The sun rising over the hills of Greece, turning the sea into a sheet of silver. Fishermen push their boats into the water, nets bundled at their feet. Women kneel at stone basins, grinding grain into flour. Children chase each other through narrow lanes, their laughter echoing across the stones. Goats bleat in the distance, and smoke rises from cooking fires. The people of Pavlopetri lived by the rhythm of land and sea. They farmed, they fished, they traded with nearby communities. Archaeologists have found evidence of dye production, suggesting they crafted textiles colored with the rich hues of the Mediterranean. They were not isolated. They were connected to a wider world, exchanging goods, ideas, and traditions. Pavlopetri thrived during the Bronze Age, a time when early civilizations were just beginning to take shape. In Mesopotamia, cities like Uruk were rising. In Egypt, pharaohs were building monuments. And here, in Greece, small communities like Pavlopetri laid the groundwork for the culture that centuries later would become classical Greece. What makes Pavlopetri unique is that it shows us the scale of everyday life, not the palaces of kings or the temples of gods, but the homes of farmers, weavers, and sailors. It is a rare glimpse into how ordinary people lived at the dawn of history. Unlike Port Royal, which was swallowed in a single day, Pavlopetri sank slowly. Rising sea levels over centuries crept higher, covering its streets little by little. Perhaps families moved inland as the water advanced. Perhaps they built walls, raised their homes, tried to resist. But in time, the sea prevailed, and the town disappeared beneath the waves. And yet, its ruins remained intact. Protected by shallow waters and soft sediments, Pavlopetri survived for thousands of years, waiting to be rediscovered. In 1967, the site was first identified by Nicholas Fleming, a marine geologist. Later, detailed surveys confirmed the astonishing truth. This was a true planned settlement, complete with streets and buildings, more than 5,000 years old. For archaeologists, it was a revelation. Here was proof that organized towns with streets and houses existed in Greece long before the rise of Mycenaean palaces or the glory of Athens. Pavlopetri rewrote the timeline of Greek urban history. To this day, Pavlopetri holds its record as the oldest submerged city known to us, and yet, despite its age, it feels strangely close. When divers swim over its ruins, they see the same layouts we might recognize in villages today: homes, streets, communal spaces. The scale of human life has changed, but the essentials remain. It is as though the voices of those early families still echo faintly in the water, reminding us that we are part of a story much older than we realize. When we speak of ancient civilizations, we often picture grand monuments, pyramids rising above the desert, palaces with marble columns, armies marching under banners. But Pavlopetri was different. It was not a city of kings or conquerors. It was a city of families. To imagine its life is to imagine not grandeur, but the quiet pulse of ordinary days 5,000 years ago. At dawn, the settlement stirred with the sounds of work. The sea was calm, and fishermen pushed their narrow boats into the shallow water, oars dipping in steady rhythm. Nets were cast, weighted with stones, and the men sang low songs to keep time. By mid-morning, the boats would return with their catch, gleaming fish that wives and children would clean, salt, and prepare. On land, fields stretched just beyond the cluster of houses. Farmers tended to plots of barley and wheat, their sickles cutting golden stalks beneath the sun. Goats and sheep grazed nearby, bells chiming softly as they moved. The animals provided milk, meat, and wool, essentials for survival and trade. Within the houses, women ground grain on stone querns, their hands moving in repetitive, steady motions. The sound was like a heartbeat for the household. Clay ovens glowed with fire, baking bread that filled the air with warmth and scent. Children played in courtyards, their laughter rising above the hum of daily work. Archaeologists tell us the houses of Pavlopetri were simple but organized. Built of stone with mud brick walls, they often had 2 or more rooms, sometimes opening onto small courtyards. Floors were made of compacted earth, and flat roofs may have been used for storage or sleeping in the cool of summer nights. Inside, vessels of clay lined the walls, jars for storing oil, amphorae for wine, pots for cooking. Many fragments have been found, painted with patterns and symbols. Even in such a modest town, beauty had its place. To decorate a pot, to carve a motif into stone, was to bring art into daily life. The people of Pavlopetri lived with the sea not only as a source of food, but as a partner in trade. Small boats carried their goods to neighboring settlements, exchanging fish, textiles, and pottery for tools, dyes, and metals. Evidence suggests they may have worked with murex shells, from which purple dye was made, a color valued throughout the ancient world. If true, then Pavlopetri was part of a network that stretched far beyond Greece, tied into the earliest threads of Mediterranean commerce. In this world, roles were divided but interwoven. Men labored in the fields and on the water. Women managed the home, prepared food, wove textiles, and cared for children. Yet both contributed to the survival of the household. A fisherman's catch was meaningless without the work of women salting and storing it. A farmer's harvest needed grinding, baking, and weaving into the fabric of life. Even children had their part. They fetched water from wells or springs, gathered firewood, tended animals. Through play, they also learned the skills that would one day sustain their families. Though no great temples have been found in Pavlopetri, the people surely held beliefs that guided their lives. Small shrines may have stood in homes, offerings placed to household gods or ancestral spirits. The presence of nearby tombs suggests that honoring the dead was important. Perhaps, at night, families gathered by the fire and told stories of spirits in the sea, of ancestors watching from beyond, of gods who blessed or cursed the harvest. These stories would have bound the community together, giving meaning to the cycles of life and death. Even in small settlements, life was not only labor. Imagine a festival evening in Pavlopetri. Torches lit in the courtyards, the air filled with the scent of roasted meat and baked bread. Men struck rhythms on drums, women sang, children clapped their hands. Simple flutes carved from bone or reed played high notes above the beat. Neighbors gathered, shared food, laughed, and danced in circles beneath the stars. In these moments, the hardships of survival softened, and the town became a place of joy as well as toil. What strikes us about Pavlopetri is not its strangeness, but its familiarity. Families rose with the sun, worked through the day, ate together, and slept beneath the stars. They loved, mourned, celebrated, and dreamed. Their world was smaller, simpler, but their humanity was the same as ours. To look at Pavlopetri is to see ourselves reflected in ancient waters. The scale may change, the tools may differ, but the rhythm of life, the need for food, shelter, community, and meaning remains constant. And yet, this life was fragile. A single failed harvest, a storm at sea, an illness, any of these could bring hardship. The people of Pavlopetri lived close to the edge, depending daily on the mercy of land and sea. Perhaps that is why their lives were filled with ritual and gratitude, with songs and offerings. To give thanks was not optional. It was essential. When we walk through Pavlopetri today, even in imagination, we do not see grandeur. We see simplicity. Houses, streets, courtyards, pots, tools. But in these fragments lies something profound. The memory of ordinary lives lived with care, struggle, and love. And perhaps this is the true gift of Pavlopetri. It reminds us that history is not only about kings and empires. It is about families who rose with the sun, worked the land, and trusted the sea. People who lived, as we do, in the hope that tomorrow would come. Unlike Heracleion, taken by sudden collapse, or Port Royal, destroyed in minutes, Pavlopetri did not vanish in a single violent event. Its disappearance was slower, quieter, drawn out over centuries. The sea crept forward step by step, as if reclaiming land it had once owned. 5,000 years ago, the coastline of Greece was different. The Aegean Sea lay lower, and the land extended farther. Pavlopetri was built near a sheltered bay, safe for small boats, close to fertile fields. For centuries, it thrived. But the earth is never still. Tectonic plates beneath the Mediterranean shifted slowly, tilting and reshaping the land. The shoreline began to change, sometimes subtly, sometimes with sudden jolts. Each movement brought the sea a little closer. At the same time, Global sea levels were rising. The last ice age had ended, and the great glaciers of Europe and North America had melted, sending their waters rushing into the oceans. By the second millennium BCE, seas around the world had risen meters higher than before. For Pavlopetri, this rise was relentless. Year by year, the sea encroached, swallowing fields, creeping into streets, flooding courtyards. At first, families may have resisted, building walls, raising thresholds, adapting their homes. But eventually, the tide proved unstoppable. Imagine living there. You wake one morning to find water seeping into your storage room. The floor is damp, your jars of grain swollen. A storm brings waves that crash against walls once far from the shore. Children splash where goats once grazed. The land is shrinking. Perhaps the people gathered, debating what to do. Some chose to move inland, carrying what they could. Others clung to the old ways, hoping the sea would retreat. But the sea did not. Slowly, the settlement emptied. Fields became marshes. Streets became pools. The sound of laughter and labor faded. One by one, families left, their homes abandoned to the rising tide. It was not a single day of disaster, but a slow retreat, stretched across generations. To a child, it may have seemed normal. The sea always a little closer than it was for their parents. Only in hindsight could anyone see that the town was being erased. In time, the sea covered Pavlopetri entirely. Roofs collapsed, walls tumbled, pots broke where they fell. Fish moved into kitchens, seaweed rooted in courtyards, crabs scuttled through doorways. The town that had once bustled with human life became part of the ocean floor. But unlike other places, Pavlopetri was not destroyed. The water preserved it. Sand and silt settled gently over the ruins, sealing them like a blanket. For centuries, the city lay hidden, undisturbed, resting in silence. Generations came and went. New villages rose along the Greek coast. The name Pavlopetri was forgotten. To locals, the shallow bay was only a place of fishing and swimming, with no hint of the town below. Yet beneath the waves, the outlines of streets, houses, and tombs remained, waiting. It was only in the 20th century, when divers and scientists began to map the sea floor, that Pavlopetri awoke again in human memory. The story of Pavlopetri is not one of sudden tragedy, but of quiet inevitability. It teaches us that change is not always violent. Sometimes it is patient. The sea does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, advancing step by step until the land yields. And perhaps that makes Pavlopetri's story even more poignant. Its people were not struck down by disaster. They lived, adapted, and moved on. Their town was not destroyed. It was transformed, becoming part of the sea itself. Today, when divers swim over Pavlopetri, they see not ruin, but order. Streets, walls, rooms, courtyards. It is as if the town still breathes, preserved in its final form. The water did not erase it. It kept it safe. Pavlopetri's submergence is a reminder that nothing is permanent. Shorelines shift, seas rise, lives move, and yet what is lost is never entirely gone. It waits, quietly, in another form, like a memory beneath the surface, ready to be rediscovered. For thousands of years, Pavlopetri slept beneath shallow waters, its streets and houses lying in silence under a thin veil of sand. Generations fished these waters, swam along this shore, and watched the waves roll across the bay, unaware that a city older than memory rested just below. It was only in the modern era, with the curiosity of science and the courage of divers, that the town returned to the world of the living. In 1967, Nicholas Fleming, a marine geologist, was surveying the coast of Laconia when he noticed unusual patterns beneath the water near a small island called Pavlopetri. Straight lines, rectangular shapes, features that nature rarely draws. He dived to investigate and realized what he had found: the unmistakable remains of a human settlement. It was the first step in bringing Pavlopetri back into memory. A year later, in 1968, a team from the University of Cambridge returned to the site. They carefully mapped the ruins, tracing streets and buildings. What they found was astonishing. Not just scattered stones, but a complete town plan. Streets, courtyards, chambers, tombs, an entire community preserved underwater. For archaeologists, this was a revelation. Never before had such an ancient submerged settlement been discovered in such detail. It was proof that organized town life existed in Greece thousands of years earlier than once believed. The mapped area covered nearly 9,000 square meters, making Pavlopetri not just the oldest, but one of the most extensive submerged cities known. The ruins were remarkably well preserved, protected by sand and shallow waters. Unlike ruins on land, where wind and rain erode walls and scatter artifacts, Pavlopetri's remains had rested undisturbed for millennia. Pottery fragments dated the site to around 2800 BCE, confirming its immense age. Later studies suggested it had been occupied through the Mycenaean period, linking it to the wider Bronze Age world. Among the ruins were houses with multiple rooms, suggesting a community more sophisticated than a simple village. Courtyards indicated shared spaces for families. Storage jars revealed trade and food production. Perhaps most striking were the tombs carved into the rock nearby. They spoke of rituals, of beliefs about life and death, of a people who honored their dead as part of daily existence. Each artifact, each stone, was not just a fragment of the past. It was a voice, faint but clear, telling of the lives once lived here. In the 21st century, technology allowed archaeologists to see Pavlopetri more clearly than ever. Using sonar mapping, 3D modeling, and robotic surveys, researchers created detailed images of the town beneath the waves. For the first time, the world could see Pavlopetri not as a broken ruin, but as a living plan, a city laid out almost like a blueprint. These studies revealed roads as wide as 2 meters, houses with multiple chambers, and evidence of workshops. They confirmed that Pavlopetri was a functioning town, part of a larger trade network in the Bronze Age Aegean. But Pavlopetri is fragile. Unlike deeper ruins, which are hidden from human contact, this city lies in shallow waters close to shore. Waves shift sand across its stones. Boats drop anchors that scrape the seabed. Pollution and rising seas threaten to erode its delicate remains. Archaeologists work carefully, documenting as much as possible before nature or human activity can erase what time has preserved. Each dive is both discovery and preservation, a race against the slow forces of change. To study Pavlopetri is to study the beginnings of urban life. It shows us that even 5,000 years ago, people were building towns with streets and houses, organizing communities with structure and purpose. It challenges our assumptions about when cities began. More than that, it connects us to the ordinary lives of the distant past. While great monuments tell us about kings and empires, Pavlopetri tells us about families, farmers, and fishermen. It reminds us that history is not only made in palaces, but also in kitchens, courtyards, and narrow lanes. Today, Pavlopetri remains mostly underwater, visible only to divers and archaeologists. But through research, maps, and reconstructions, its story reaches us on land. Museums display its pottery, documentaries recreate its streets, and, in imagination, we can walk once more through its alleys, hearing the echoes of voices carried by the sea. It is no longer forgotten. The sea kept it safe, and now memory keeps it alive. Take a deep breath and imagine yourself standing on the coast of southern Greece. The sea before you is calm, clear, a brilliant blue under the Mediterranean sun. The shoreline is quiet, with only the gentle lap of waves against sand. But you know that just beyond, under only a few meters of water, lies a city older than almost any you have heard of. You fit your mask, draw one final breath of warm air, and step forward. The sea embraces you, cool and gentle. The surface closes above your head. Light floods the shallow water, carrying with it a shimmering clarity. Unlike the darker depths of Heracleion or Port Royal, here the sea is transparent, almost crystalline. You can see the seabed clearly, shapes carved in stone, lines that do not belong to nature. You descend slowly, and there it is, Pavlopetri, a city drawn in stone, still visible after 5,000 years. Streets stretch before you, straight and narrow. Foundations of houses form neat rectangles. It is as though the sea has laid a veil over a map, preserving the design beneath. You follow one of the streets. The stones are low now, worn by time, but their pattern is unmistakable. Once, children must have run here, chasing each other in the dust. Farmers carried baskets of grain. Fishermen, nets heavy with the morning catch. The sounds are gone, but the space remembers. As you drift forward, the water ripples softly over the outlines, and sunlight paints shifting patterns across the stones. You approach a cluster of foundations. Here was a home, rooms arranged around a small courtyard. You picture a family gathering in the shade, sharing bread baked in clay ovens. A child's laughter rings faintly in your imagination. Perhaps goats were tethered nearby, their bells tinkling. Inside the outlines, fragments of pottery still rest. Shards of bowls and jars, once painted with delicate designs. You hover, and for a moment it feels as if you could step inside, sit among them, and join their life. In the center of the town lies a larger open space, perhaps a gathering place. You drift above it, and in your mind it fills with people. Neighbors trading fish for grain, women exchanging cloth, men discussing the weather, the sea, the harvest. A marketplace, simple but vital. The stones here are silent now, but the openness of the space carries the memory of voices. Nearby, carved into rock, are the outlines of tombs. The water softens their edges, but they remain clear. You pause before them. Once families came here to honor their dead, bringing offerings, whispering prayers. Now fish slip quietly in and out of the hollows, guardians of the forgotten. You feel no fear, only calm. These are not ruins of despair, but of continuity. Life and death, side by side, as they always were. Everywhere you look, the sea has transformed the town, but not destroyed it. Seaweed drapes gently over walls. Small crabs scuttle across stones. Tiny fish dart through doorways. The city lives, but in a different way now, woven into the ecosystem of the Mediterranean. The water does not erase, it adapts, turning houses into reefs, courtyards into seagrass gardens, streets into pathways for creatures of the sea. As you drift above Pavlopetri, you sense time differently. 5,000 years do not feel like distance here. They feel like a pause, as though the city simply stepped aside, waiting quietly until you arrived. You realize that these stones belong to people not so different from you. They worked, laughed, struggled, loved. Their world was smaller, their tools simpler, but their humanity was the same. Pavlopetri is not alien. It is familiar, a reflection of ourselves, softened by time and water. Slowly, your body begins to rise. The outlines of the town grow smaller beneath you. Streets fade into sand. Houses dissolve into the shimmer of light. The sea covers them again, gently, as it has for thousands of years. You break the surface, the sunlight dazzling your eyes. The waves close behind you, hiding Pavlopetri once more. But you carry its memory with you, the oldest submerged city, preserved in silence, reminding you of how far back our story goes. Pavlopetri remains below, resting peacefully in its shallow bay, a dream of the Bronze Age still visible beneath the rippling waters. The sea holds many secrets. It cradles wrecks of ships, statues toppled from temples, coins slipped from careless hands. But among its most haunting treasures are cities, whole worlds once filled with voices, now resting in silence beneath the waves. We have journeyed through 3 such places, each different, each carrying its own story. Yet together, they remind us of something profound about time, memory, and the fragility of human life. Heracleion stood at the mouth of the Nile, a city of gods and merchants, where colossal temples towered above the harbor and sailors carried offerings before setting out to sea. For centuries, it thrived as Egypt's gate to the Mediterranean. And then, it was gone. Earthquakes shook its ground, floods softened its soil, and the city slid beneath the sea. To later generations, it became a name in old texts, a shadow, perhaps a myth. Until one day, divers descended and found it waiting. Statues lying in silt, columns still standing in watery silence. Heracleion reminds us that even the grandest cities can fall. But it also shows us that memory can survive, preserved in unexpected ways, carried by the patience of the sea. Port Royal, by contrast, was a city of noise, laughter, and sin. Taverns spilled music into the streets. Dice rolled on tables. Coins clinked in every pocket. It was called the wickedest city on earth, but it was also one of the richest, a jewel of the Caribbean. Its fall came not with centuries of creeping water, but in a single violent morning. The earthquake of 1692 turned solid ground to liquid, swallowed buildings whole, and dragged the city into the sea in minutes. Time stopped at 1143, captured forever in a broken pocket watch. Port Royal teaches us the swiftness of change, the way life can shift from laughter to silence in the space of a breath. And yet, beneath the water, its streets remain. Dice, mugs, and pipes still lie scattered, as though waiting for their owners to return. And then there is Pavlopetri, the quietest of the 3. A small town, not of kings, but of families. Its people fished, farmed, wove cloth, raised children, honored their dead. They lived 5,000 years ago at the dawn of cities. There was no sudden catastrophe here. The sea rose slowly, patiently, advancing year by year until the town was gone. Families moved inland, life shifted, and the city was forgotten. Yet the sea preserved it. Streets, houses, and courtyards remain, the oldest submerged city we know, visible today beneath crystal waters. Pavlopetri shows us that history is not only monuments and empires. It is also kitchens, courtyards, and the laughter of children. And that even ordinary lives, lived quietly, can leave traces that endure across millennia. 3 cities, 3 fates. One swallowed suddenly by earthquake. One lost in gradual collapse. one surrendered slowly to the tide. And yet, when we visit them now, the differences fade. What remains is silence. Heracleon's statues rest in peace. Port Royal's taverns lie quiet, their mugs and dice untouched. Pavlopetri's streets wait beneath sunlight, clear and still. The sea has covered them, but also protected them. It has turned their noise into whispers, their daily life into dreams. What do these cities teach us? That nothing is permanent. That human life, however grand or loud, is fragile before time and nature. That the ground beneath our feet, which feels so solid, can shift in an instant or slowly dissolve over centuries. But also, that what is lost is not truly gone. It transforms. A city of gods becomes a temple for fish. A tavern becomes a reef. A street becomes a path for light across the seabed. And in rediscovery, we learn to see not only their past, but our own place in the long story of time. Close your eyes and picture the three together. Heracleon's colossi, half buried in silt, gazing upward through green water. Port Royal's brick streets, dice still lying where they rolled. Pavlopetri's courtyards, sunlight flickering across 5,000-year-old stones. They are cities no longer, and yet they remain. They live in memory, in imagination, in the patient embrace of the sea. The sea does not forget. It remembers in silence, holding fragments of lives once loud and fleeting. And if we listen, if we dive into its depths in body or in thought, it will share those stories with us, not in shouts, but in whispers, soft as waves against the shore. And so we leave these cities behind, knowing they are not truly lost. They are part of the sea now, part of history, part of us.
Opa!